So, I'm a big Junji fan, but lately his books have kind of been sitting collecting dust on my bookshelf, and I haven't really picked one up in a while. So, I thought, what better way to keep enjoying its content than to read every single entire book again and to make a giant tier list ranking every single story, which is what I'm going to do today. Hi, if you're new here, I'm that horror girl. I also go by Ada, and here we talk about all things horror, horror media, horror history, horror books. So if that sounds interesting to you, maybe stick around. So I do want to preface this by saying I don't own every single Junji book. I think this includes Deserter, Tombs, Alley, Black Paradox, and Fragments of Horror, but I do have the other 13 behind me that I'll be talking about today. So yeah, let's get into it. So coming in dead last at number 13, we have No Longer Human. So this is actually an adaptation by Osamu Dazai, who was pretty popular in Japan. I realize this is a pretty controversial take to have this book ranked so low, but I'll get into what it's about first, and then I'll explain why I don't like it. No Longer Human follows Yozo Obo throughout adolescence and adulthood, and he quite clearly has severe anxiety and depression, which result in him having harmful relationships with women and his family that quite often than not result in extreme pain or even death for the women he meets. The art, of course, being by Junji Ito, is insanely good. It just cannot make up for how terrible the story is. Yozu is pretty much the only character with any depth, and all of the women he meets are treated as brainless and really lack any personality, and are cannon fodder for Yozo to move forward throughout the plot. This would all be fine, or at least kind of okay, if the novel treated Yozo as if he were terrible, but it almost feels sympathetic towards him that it even condemns the women for holding him back, especially towards the end, where his wife and son are pinned as villains despite all the debauchery he put them through. So I feel like a plethora of books and media are able to express the effects of depression and the human condition in a much better way than this book. So yeah, that's number 13. So in number 12 we have Love Sickness. Now, because this is a short story collection, I did rank every single story within it. So we'll go from my favorite to my least favorite, which my favorite was The Rib Woman, and then we have The Mansion of Phantom Pain, Screams in the Night, The Boy in White, Beautiful Boy at the Crossroads, A Woman in Distress, Shadow, The Seance, Narumi's Boyfriend, and Memories of Real Poop. About 3/4 of Love Sickness is following the same story about a foggy town where people get their fortune told by a beautiful young boy. We find out very early on, however, that this boy gives out curses rather than fortunes, and the rest of the stories follow Ryusuke as he tries to stop the Crossroads boy. And then we have two stories about the strange Hikazuri siblings, following Narumi and their deceased father, and then finally my two favorites, The Mansion of Phantom Pain, following a young boy who feels phantom pain outside of his body around his house, and The Rib Woman, following an insecure girl who got surgery to remove her ribs only to find a woman playing a tune with her ribs that wants them for herself. So this one was ranked so lowly for me, mostly because of the love sickness story itself, the boy at the crossroads, because it does take up such a large percentage of the novel, and I didn't find it to be that enjoyable. Overall, the book just wasn't my favorite. I think the premise at least is interesting. However, the boy himself kind of looks pretty silly. So it's a bit hard to take it seriously because he is kind of presented as a threat in the novel. The only thing holding this book together was the tattooed woman. That was by far the best art of the whole book. So yeah, that's Love Sickness at number 12. And in number 11, I have Frankenstein. Now this is also partially another Junji Ito adaptation. Obviously, he didn't write Frankenstein. It's about only half the book, and then the other half is another short story collection. So obviously I did rank those as well. So my favorite was Pen Pal, and then we have The Walls, Hell of a Doll Funeral, Intruder, The Strange Tale of Oshikiri, Next Spectre, Bog of Living Spirits, Face firmly in place, and hide and seek with Non Non, and then Frankenstein last. So the story of Frankenstein is pretty much about half the book, and it follows the original pretty completely, save for maybe a slightly bigger focus on the bride. But other than that, there's not a whole lot else to say. The next five short stories are all independent horrors, all following the same protagonist, Oshikiri. And the standout here, I would say, was Pen Pal and The Walls, where we find out a girl's pen pal who's been sending her death threats is really written by herself, and The Walls, where Oshikiri's family from alternate dimensions travel over, but not everything goes accordingly with the transition. And then we have Hell of a Doll Funeral, super short, about a little girl who's turned into a doll, but the transformation doesn't stop there. And then Face Family in Place. And then two stories about a dog, Non Non. Hide and Seek with Non Non was kind of just like, I mean, yeah, not a whole lot to say there. So yeah, that is the short story collection of Frankenstein. Number 10 is the Liminal Zone Part 2. Now, I feel like this is a step up almost purely because of the art in that one story. If you read it, you know what I'm talking about. The Village of Ether. I mean, it's just so cool. But this is also another short story collection, and I did rank those. Number one being The Village of Ether, and then we have Demon King of Dust, and then the Shells of Manjunuma, and last was the Strange Hirazaki Siblings. So this one opens with the Demon King of Dust, following a family plagued by the Dust King, although the son soon finds out that one of their maids could be behind his family's misfortune. Being one of the more recent Junji Ito entries, the art is immaculate and definitely some of his best. And then so we move on to the Village of Ether, which is what the book is mostly centered around, in which the existence of perpetual motion machines is limited to this one town, and they're used in sinister ways to maintain servants for their creator. And then we have by far my least favorite, the Hikazuri siblings, this time following the uncle. I mean, hey, I want Yakyo Yam if that's what you're into. It's just definitely not my thing. And then the final story, The Shells of Manju Nunuma, is about a curse of seeing people's faces in turtle shells and then they end up dying, which was pretty short but still a really decent entry. But unlike Frankenstein, these were all really solid entries, each one of them, so that's also just kind of why it's more of a step up. So yeah, in number 10 for me is The Liminal Zone Part 2. Now, number 9 was the Liminal Zone Part 1. I liked this one better, mostly because of the religious imagery and the story Madonna. I thought that one was really good. That was definitely my favorite. And then we have Weeping Woman Way, and then Slumber, and then the Spirit Flow of Akoigara. So the first step being Weeping Woman Way. This one is about a woman discovering a town where weeping women can be hired at funerals to mourn the dead. And this one was interesting, not super amazing, but still a really cool and definitely a creepy concept. And then we have Madonna, my favorite entry. This one's about a Catholic school where the head lady believes she is Madonna herself reborn, and things get super weird. I just love the plot twist in the story, and the art is just next level. And then we have the Spirit Flow of Akoigara, which, if you're unfamiliar, this is the suicide forest of Japan. And this one started off really strong for me and then just kind of got way too silly for me in a bad way. And finally, ending on a strong note, we have Slumber. This is about a man who believes he is committing murders in his sleep. The plot twist was so unexpected, at least for me, and it was just a really solid read. And I'd say the art is also kind of on par with The Liminal Zone Part 2. Maybe Part 2 is slightly better, but just for me personally, I really liked the art in Madonna particularly, and that's why that one's slightly higher for me, although only by a little bit. So yeah, that's number 10, The Liminal Zone Part 1. Now, in number 8 for me is Remina. So, Remina, of course, is a single story, and it opens really strong with some insane art and a time jump to the martyring of Remina. We quickly learn that when we jump to the present day, that she is the daughter of a researcher that has discovered a new planet heading towards the Earth that he has named after his daughter, Remina. The world, however, quickly learns that the planet is going to crash into the Earth, and Remina and her family are blamed and scapegoated. They spend the rest of the book trying to escape the people of the world, and Remina eventually crashes into the Earth, so the girl escapes in a spaceship by herself. Now, Remina is really good and the art is top tier. It just simply has to be this low because there are betters out there, but it is a really good read and I definitely recommend it. So, yeah, number 8 is Remina. In number 7, just after Remina, we have Moan, and this is another short story collection. So, my favorites was Moan, Under the Ground, Flesh Colored Mystery, Supernatural Transfer Student, Blood of Grove, and Near Miss. So, the first story, being Supernatural Transfer Student, follows a young transfer student as he discovers weirder and weirder things in the town that weren't there before. This one's really solid and pretty funny as well. Just not amazing as some of the others in here, especially the next story, Moan, which follows two clean freak sisters being stalked by a gross guy. One of the sisters leads him back to their house and their mother chases him out, but then their pipes start making weird sounds, and it turns out he has shoved himself into the pipes and pulls in one of the sisters with him. And then we have Blood or Grove. This one's pretty predictable. It's kind of just the classic vampire story with the twist of the blood growing outside of the body. And then another one of my favorites, Flesh Colored Mystery. I don't even want to say anything, you just have to read it. It's so ridiculous and freaky at the same time and does not go where you think it would go. Near Miss isn't really worth talking about. It's like a classic plain disappearance. And then the final story, Under the Ground, follows a high school reunion as these two women talk about one of their old classmates, and it's just so creepy, and the ending is really unexpected, at least for me, and it's just an insanely solid, really short story. Moan and Under the Ground were just so good. So good. So that is number 7, Moan. So number 6 is Venus in the Blind Spot. I do really feel like this is definitely a step up from Moan. The art at the beginning of the book is really cool. As a book in general, I feel like it's more well-rounded. And it's another short story collection, so my favorites were Fault Lines, Billions Alone, Venus in the Blind Spot, The Human Chair, The Principal Post, Master Umez and Me, Keepsake, The Looking Woman, and How Love Came to Professor Kiribati. So the book opens with some full color pages, which are super cool. And we open with Billions Alone, which was a really solid short story with a couple of pages that are in color, which is nice. And we also have a couple of adaptations, which are The Human Chair and An Earthly Love, both by Edogawa Runpo. The Human Chair was definitely the better of the two, and the final adaptation was How Love Came to Professor Kiribati, which was one of my least favorites. I didn't think it was just that interesting. And of course, we have Venus in the Blind Spot, following a UFO obsessed group that suddenly lose the ability to see a certain girl. And this one was a really cool concept and definitely worth the read. Other stories include The Licking Woman, which is exactly what it sounds like, and then The Enigma of Amagara Fault, which was beyond creepy, and definitely one of his most well-recognized short stories. It's about a fault with human-shaped holes that seem to perfectly fit the shape of specific people. And then we have The Sad Tale of the Principal Post, which is another super short read, but incredibly spooky and also sad. We also have Keepsake, which I didn't think was super interesting. It was definitely creepy and kind of on the higher end of the low of the book. Yeah, but it definitely wasn't anything new. And finally, we have Master Umez and Me. This one's about Junji Ito himself and how he was introduced to horror manga through the famous author Kazuo Umez. And this is obviously not a classic Junji Ito story, but I thought, as a big fan myself, I thought it was really cool to get a little insight. And the story itself is like pretty funny. Yeah, so that is Venus in the Blind Spot in its entirety. Fault Lines was by far my favorite. That was probably one of the first Junji Ito stories I heard about. Before I was really into reading horror and manga in general, and it really creeped me out when I first heard about it. And so now it's kind of just a nostalgic favorite. So yeah, that is Venus in the Blind Spot at number 6. Okay, so now we're in my top 5 Junji Ito books. And at number 5, I have Smashed. This is another short story collection. So from my favorite to my least favorite, we have I Don't Want to Be a Ghost, Library Vision, Death Row Doorbell, Earthbound, Raw, Smashed, Splendid Shadow Song, Mystery of the Haunted House, Bloodsucking Darkness, In Mirror Valley, Ghosts of Prime Time, Soichi's version, and Soichi's Beloved Pet. Smashed opens with two of my least favorites in the book, Bloodsucking Darkness and Ghosts of Prime Time. This one's about vampire bats and mysterious comedians, respectively. But then we have Raw and Earthbound, which entirely make up for it. Raw is about a reoccurring ghost flood where an old man is desperately trying to save his late wife. This one was really sad, but also a kind of a wholesome short story. And then we have Earthbound, which is one of the craziest discoveries in a Junji Ito short story, probably to date, where people are rooted in place and cannot move, though no one knows why. And then we move on to Death Row Doorbell, another really intriguing concept of a death row inmate begging for forgiveness to escape the death penalty. And then, unfortunately, we're up to 3 stories following Soichi. If anything, only Soichi's Beloved Pet is really worth reading, in my opinion. His character, I just feel, is so pointless. And the stories themselves completely lose the mystery aspect because you know that you're following just Soichi's antics and there's not really like any big mystery behind what he's doing. But anyway, then we have In Mirror Valley, another banger, though definitely not as good as some of the other entries in here. And after that, we have I Don't Want to Be a Ghost, as well as Library Visions, which are my 2 favourites from this book. With the creepiest plot twist from I Don't Want to Be a Ghost. And definitely a really interesting read from Library Visions. And finally, we have Splendid Shadow Song and Smashed. These were a step up from some of the other short stories in other books, and definitely worth reading, though being in the same book as I Don't Want to Be a Ghost, it's just a tough act to follow, but these 2 were also really good. Now, I Don't Want to Be a Ghost was genuinely so good. It might be my favorite Junji Ito short story ever. But all of the stories were genuinely so interesting, and even if I didn't personally love them, they had really cool, engaging concepts. So yeah, that is my number 5 pick for Junji Ito. So in number 4, I have Censor. So right off the bat with this one, you can tell just how much Junji Ito's art style has improved and been defined through this book, which just adds to the charm of the story, in which we are following a town decimated in a volcano, save for one girl preserved in hair. It's wacky in the best way and really entertaining. The chapters are kind of their own mini subplots, but you can tell how they relate to the main story and world build really well. This is a great book, especially for fans of Remina, and definitely a must read in my opinion. And it might be because I read it recently for the first time, but I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good, interesting read. It might not be for everyone. If you're especially not into H.P. Lovecraft, kind of, you might not like it, but I really enjoyed it. So yeah, that's my number 4 pick. So up to my top 3 Junji Ito picks, to probably no one's surprise. In number 3, I have Tomi. And finally, we have the monster of a book that is Tomie. The first chapter was actually written quite a bit before the rest of the book, and I actually feel like it aids the story in that Tomie appears much more innocent and human like before her eventual transformation into what you could probably call like a curse. If you're unfamiliar with Tomie, it follows the same girl as men around her become so obsessed with her that they end up brutalizing and killing her, but she always comes back. I think it's a great story about violence against women and misogyny, about obsession and domestic abuse. The only reason I wouldn't rank this higher is simply because how long the book is. And once you've read like 400 pages and you know exactly what's going to happen, it kind of drags a little bit. But I think this is definitely some of his best art, and the stories are still really interesting and different despite there being so many of them, and it's definitely a must read. Like, out of all of his works, Tomie is probably the one you could write an essay about, if you know what I mean. It's just so good. So yeah, that is my number 3. So, number 2, this is the first Junji Ito book I ever read. I have Gyo. So Gyo is definitely less well known than Tamiya and Uzumaki, and it follows fish with legs terrorizing Japan. This is definitely Ito's most apocalyptic and monster-focused book, and it just gets crazier and crazier with these elaborate and disgusting machines. And I might be a little nostalgia based because this is the first book of Junji Ito I ever read, but overall, I think it's just a really great and satisfying, complete apocalyptic story with some awesome fish art. So yeah, my second favorite Junji Ito book. Go. So my number 1 favorite Junji Ito book, the one I recommend the most, probably to no one's surprise and everybody else's favorite as well, we have Uzumaki. I mean, could you tell? It's just so good. It's one of those books you have to read before you die. Even if you're not a fan of manga, it's just so enjoyable. It's really creepy. It's really cool. The concept is super interesting. I think it's just a perfect book. So Uzumaki opens as a slow burn, following Kyrie and her boyfriend as their town is slowly taken over by spirals. We start off with a couple of short stories involving the spiral, and as the town is slowly descending into madness, we get a more complex and complete picture. The pacing is incredible, and every chapter has insane art and really interesting plots. And it's at chapter 12 where we finally follow the apocalyptic town after a typhoon rips straight through it. It's the perfect descent into madness and well worth the praise it receives. Uzumaki has a fitting end with Kyrie and her boyfriend intertwined at the bottom of the spiral town. So that is all of my Junji Ito books that I've read ranked. Probably unsurprising that my favorite was Uzumaki. I'm sure yours is too. Although, let me know. I mean, he's one of my favorite authors. I'd love to talk about him more if I could, but this video would be like probably an hour long if I did. I still have plenty more to read, so give me recommendations if you have them. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Bye.